Yosio, it's your host, Joshua Hopping, and welcome to the Fractured Faith podcast, where we really kind of explore the fullness and the mystery of the faith of following Jesus of Nazareth and just what that is. I'm going to different cultures and different ways and historical, just everything, basically. We kind of talk through it and also kind of what those beliefs how they impact our day-to-day lives that we go through it. And of course, through your deconstruction journey, you really I kind of hope that you be able to find that the faith is much broader and mysterious than what some of us grew up to be. And as you guys know, last time when we actually talked about 8 different theories of the atonement. The atonement being what happened on the cross. So when Jesus of Nazareth dies and he raised from the dead, he ascends, what happened and how did that event in human history affect the kind of the human condition, so to speak, right? And when we talked about it, we really kind of shared that there's been several different ways of understanding that, because the Bible actually doesn't give us just one view of the cross. There's actually multiple views of the cross, and a lot of it determines what theory you come to is determined by where you think humanity is, and like with the position of humanity and what is needed to be able to come and be done with humanity, and how did that affect your sin and total depravity and the goodness and all those elements. Is a kind of a full picture, a lot of different areas. And earlier in the podcast, we actually talked about total depravity, so-called the fall, and some other items in that one. So go back and listen to some of those, because they do have impact on how you view the cross. But if I re-summarize real quickly on some of the previous time, because today, as I promised you last time, is I want to talk about a Cherokee theology of the atonement, or really how that would look like from a Cherokee point of view. And to really, before I get there, I kind of want to hit a little bit on last week's about how the culture of the people influenced how they saw things a little bit. Now, for those who's brand new, real quick, I better pause for a moment, introduce myself again. So for those who are just joining us for brand new to the podcast, so Joshua Hopping, I said I am a Cherokee Nation citizen. Currently live in Northwest Arkansas, but I grew up on the reservation in Oklahoma. Over the years, through my life that went through it, I've actually became a pastor, church planner, and I have a master's of theology and culture, and really right now, really kind of interested in that intersection between Cherokee culture and Christianity, and really contextualizing and decolonializing a lot of what we see as European American Christianity, which can be different than, I would say, the historical Christianity or the faith that we see coming out of basically the Middle East during the first century, and as they developed through history, kind of pulling that back a little bit. Love the church fathers and the church mothers, and really kind of unpacking a little bit of that. So that's really kind of the perspective I'm coming from. Now, I can always say this is a Cherokee view of the atonement. In other words, this is kind of my attempt at looking at it. There's a Cherokee Baptist Association that may look at things differently. There are other Cherokees out there as well, so blessings to them. There's big enough of the faith of Christ and Jesus to be able to accommodate all of them. But this is something, as I wrestle through the views of the atonement and as I think through things, this is some of the ideals that I've come up with, and I'll kind of share with you when I get going. So with that, I'm going to kind of take us back just a little bit. I'm not going to redo all of last time. You go listen to that one. I go in a lot more detail about these various views of the atonement. But one thing I want to say is that one of the things in there is, like, if you were ancient Hebrew in the first century, one of the things that's really key on them is the Hebrew faith throughout the Old Testament into the New Testament was this concept of the covenant, covenant. In other words, there's a covenant relationship with this agreement between the Creator and Adam and Eve, between the Creator and Noah, between the Creator and even the animals and the plants and everything in the Vedic covenant. You have the Abrahamic covenant, you have the Mosaic covenant, and then the Davidic covenant. So it really is a sense that the covenant was a promise or this agreement really between two different people, right? And usually it was between the Creator, God, and somebody else on that journey in that faith, one of the patriarchs. And a lot of that actually follows kind of the ancient Near Eastern Susan vessel treaties that they have, or you had a powerful lord making a treaty or agreement with a less powerful person or lord to come into it. And there's a lot of parallels between the suzerain vassal treaties we have in the ancient Near East and like Deuteronomy, for example. They pretty much mirror each other like really, really close. And so you see that same concept of what play in there. So you see culture kind of in play. So within this deal, though, the Hebrew people knew that they were the children of God because they had a covenant with God, the Creator, through Moses and through Abraham and the different patriarchs. That's why they said we are children of Abraham. We have that Mosaic covenant. And when they get off on that covenant, the prophets would come and bring them back and say, hey, you need to obey the covenant that you have made between it, or even reminding the Creator saying, hey, remember us, you got to take care of us because that was the covenant that we made. So when Jesus came on the picture and when he was saying he was fulfilling those covenants and actually walking in that covenant and having a new covenant, and part of that new covenant, there was some kind of blood being shed at that time. So whether it's the blood of a animal that's being sacrificed, as in a chance of like Noah or Abraham, even during when Adam and Eve were together, there's a covenant where they actually, when they left the garden, there was an animal that was killed and their garments spread upon them. So there was some kind of sacrifice or cost that had some kind of blood covenant that was connected to that agreement. That's why Jesus said, this is my body broken for you. This is my blood, which is given to you as a new covenant to be able to have. So that's where they saw in that picture. Now, you also had times where when it left the Hebraic people and it went into the more Roman Empire, it went into a lot of the Greeks and a lot of different ethnicity of the Roman Empire, they started looking at things a little differently because they didn't have that same covenantal mindset the Hebrew had. So they came up with ideals of, well, we were in bondage because of, the different gods and goddesses of Zeus and Atheus and all these different gods and places. And Mozart, they're coming there. And so we need to be rescued. We need to be freed. And we have Jesus as the King of Kings. He's the Lord of Lords. He's the one who conquers all this. And so he has set us free from this sin and this death and this concept. And that spoke to them because they realized that he really was God who really was able to create her above and beyond all the other gods and goddesses of deals. So again, that spoke. Or maybe if you want to go into the kind of this ideal of recapitulations of Irenaeus, it says, Christ is the new Adam. He's reliving in this Adam. He's the new beginning of life that we have. And as all of us in humanity is connected with the beginning of Adam and Eve, like the beginning of humanity, so to speak. So we are caught in that and we are redone, right? And then, of course, in the Middle Ages, you got into the penal substitutionary atonement, which is the big one, which is ideal that Christ bears the penalty for human sin. And that really was this ideal of feudalism of where when you offended the kings or royalties in their honor, the result was death. And so everybody was deserving a death, no matter what sin it was deserving a death. And so that is what humanity was in. We were in that state of sin. We were in a state of offending God because of our evilness. So Christ steps in, bears that pain for us, and then rescue us from it. But that was understood in that European legal system that they thought and understood of laws and kings and queens and stuff in that time. So you can see that in the scriptures, there's definitely verses that you can pull out and you can read that really emphasizes any of those different views. And in my previous podcast, I actually read some of those scriptures and I talk about how the implications of them in that view. But they all have an ideal of culture that's in it. And this is the thing, is that the incarnation of Christ, incarnation of God, is God works in and through culture. He's not like hiding from culture. It's like their culture is something that we ignore. We have to pay attention to the time we live in and how we understand things, because that does affect how we read the scriptures, the emphasis that we bring on it, or even the words that we use. Understanding, of course, that the Bible was written in ancient Hebrew and Aramaic, and then in ancient Koine Greek, and had been translated through years into English and into Spanish and to multiple other languages. languages. And so if you start going to other languages, they're going to have different understandings of these words because they are different. Not everybody has the word sin, for example, or understanding what sin is. For in Cherokee, we don't really have sin. We didn't have a concept of sin before the European invasion. It was a different one. And so every culture has a little bit of a different feel to it, but I do believe that God or the creator, Nedohi, as we would say in Cherokee, actually has a voice into our people and their lives. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. Now, to start off with this, I want to tell a story. I want to kind of back up and say, from a Cherokee point of view, one of our key stories are kind of ideals that grounds us of who we are, right? The Anikaduagi, the real people, the Aniua. We had these stories that kind of told us how the world lived and our place in the world that surrounds us. And one of those big stories that kind of contact us is one of when sorrow entered the world, okay? Now, in this one, there's a time, long ago, as the elders once said, that the forest dwellers lived in harmony, or tohi, in balance and harmony. Everyone from the smallest insect to the quickest four-legged mammal, the high-flying birds, we all spoke a common language. Okay. Now, the youngest of the forest dwellers were the Anikaduagi or the Cherokees, and we would join in conversation and we would go. Now, there were times when we would forget to listen and we inadvertently broke that balance to the harmony of the forest. And this is a story of that time because in that time we started maybe forgetting to respect our elders, and we started kind of hunting and we started killing just indiscriminately, not just for our food, not just for our substance, because we can understand that, right? The animals, even them and the animals and the plants, there's a certain amount that they need to eat, but we started doing it and taking too much. And we used to smack the birds and pull their feathers and, kill the animals and shoot arrows and blow darts at the rabbits whenever we want to, just because we wanted to. It was in our greed and our selfishness that all of a sudden we started to break the tohi of the forest. Now, when this was coming together, the forest dwellers, they say, you know what? We have to come together in a council because this cannot keep going on. And now the bears were the first to speak, and the chief white bear kind of came and landed, and they complained about the way that mankind was killing their friends and eating their flesh and using their skins for purposes. So after each bear is spoken, they unanimously decided to make war upon the Cherokees. But they did not know how to do that. What weapon do they use against us? One bear asked. And they said they used the bow and the arrow, answered the others. So a little bit unsure, the original bear cried out and asked them for the materials for the bow and arrows. So they came and they said, hey, the bow was made out of wood, and the string is from an intro, the guts of the bear. So they were taken back a little bit, but you know what? They pushed on, and one of them sacrificed himself and agreed to be killed to be able to find a string for that bow and arrow. So they killed that bear, and they took that string, the sinew for the string, and they took a locust branch and they bent it into a bow, and then they made some arrows. Now, when they made this arrow, they tried to use the arrow, but the claws got sticking in the bowstrings, and they couldn't quite get it. They kept going wide and going different places. And so then they tried to cut her claws. Seeing the problem was their claws. They thought about cutting them short, but then they knew that would have problems. But you know what? They went ahead and did that, and they cut her claws short. And sure enough, soon the arrow struck true. But then they realized that if they really were going to really fight against that one, they would not be able to get the shellfish or climb or do any of the things that they wanted to do in digging. And so in that, they decided that, you know what, we are not going to cut our claws because, he gave us our teeth and our claws. So they decided to lay down the weapons and to go off into the woods and fade away and stop the increase. And so they left the council. Now, the other animals, they stayed and they jumped up, little deer, specifically the leader of the deer. And he said, you know what? We are going to do something. What's going on? And one by one, the deer talked about how bad it was, the ungrateful Cherokees that were killing and indiscriminately using and throwing away their meat and their hides and stuff without really giving gratitude at all, right? So as the sun set, they decided to send raptors and arthritis to every hunter who should kill one of them without first asking the pardon for the offense. And Little Deer would go up and he would track down any hunter they'd give him that sickness if he failed to offer thanksgivings and offer thanks and ask pardon for any deer they might have. Now, with that declaration, the deer council broke up and they each went their way and they went on. But having watched the bears and the deers, the other forest animals decided to join against the humans again because of their disrespect and their selfishness. So the fish and the reptiles came and decided to make their victims dream of snakes twisting around and eating a rotten flesh and go. And then the birds and insects and little ones all went around to be able to do it. Even the toads jumped forward and said, we must do something to check their increase or they'll be too numerous. And they said, hey, I am too ugly. And they called me ugly and all the problems. And so, you know what? They said death and death. And so one by one, they actually began to say, hey, we're going to affect this disease or this element on the Cherokees because of their sin of breaking Tohi of the forest through that greed and their selfishness and their disrespect of the elders. And then silently watching, though, you have the plants. And the plants decide to actually hold their own councils because, you know what? They looked at them and they said, you know what, the Cherokees actually helped them out. So they came forth in their council and then they offered remedies or cures for the illness and disease that was given by the animals. And soon each plant, from the tallest tree to the grasses and the moss below, gave their promise that I shall appear to humanity when they call upon me in need, and I will help them in that sickness. And so from that day, we, the Anikatuigi, the Cherokees, we will ask the plants not only for food, but for the medicine to heal our bodies, our hearts, and our minds. So the elders say. So you hear within this story that you hear this ideal that there was a time when everything was in harmony, that Tohi would be this ideal of harmony or balance. Balance is not like a balancing of a weight. The balance is that things are in the right place, that things are set up properly, where everything is in order and everything operates smoothly. Again, that harmony place. And in that harmony, that place, it was perfect until the humans, or the Anikatuigi, the Cherokees in this story, broke the harmony for their selfishness and greed. And in that break in them, now disease has entered the world through the animals that spoke. Medicine also has entered through the plants. Now, of course, within this ideal of the place of this worldview, the hunters, when they would go out to hunt, they would purify themselves through ritual bathing and singing. They would abstain from sexual intercourse, and they would make prayers, and they would prepare themselves before they went out on the hunt. And when they went to the hunt, they would ask the animals, the deers and the buffalo and the elk, and they would ask them, say, hey, those who give to us, give us your life so we will treat you with respect, and we will use the hide and the corns and the meat and everything else for our survival, and we will honor you by doing that. Right? Because there's an idea that in making that harmony or balance, we owe the animals that even that we were killing to eat, we owe them a certain amount of respect. And the belief was if an animal showed themselves to us so we can shoot them, it was a choice of the animal gave to us. So in other words, it wasn't our skill as a hunter that we somehow snuck up and grabbed the animal and killed them. It was the animal chose to show themselves to us as a hunter. Do it. And then if we did not see an animal, and if we did not kill an animal, then it was us that we had to go back and we had to purify ourselves, and we need to have our prayers, because if we disrespected animals in some way that they chose not to give to us, right? It's a different worldview in your thinking of that direction, right? And that is where we had that balance, and we had the healings of the plants and the animals. And we actually even had our ceremonies were set around teaching and telling about keeping the harmony, the tohi, not just between each other between the different peoples of the village, human village, but also within the nature and the animals and the longman of the rivers and the mountains and we between the skies and the underworld and the seven directions and all that place we lived in balance and in harmony. Okay. That is where we structured our life and our place. Now, if you take that as a starting point, and then you look at the Hebraic scripture, you see that even in the Hebrew story, that there are some overlap or some similarities, right? Of where you had this time that the humanity lived with the animals and the trees in a state of harmony, of balance, called, the garden that was in Eden, or the Garden of Eden. And in the sense that everything was right, and it was the choices of Adam and Eve, of Ammon, the mankind and womankind, who took the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that actually then broke the harmony of that time between Unedohi, the creator, and the animals and the trees, and in that they were then escorted out of that garden. Now, in a lot of American Western evangelicalism, they would say that's called the fall. They're the falling from grace. And I think that is a assumed ideal, because that verse, the fall, it doesn't come up. There's no verse in the Bible that talks about the fall. It really is more of a Greek and Hebrew view, because for them, anything that breaks perfection is imperfection, and that's Plato and it's Aristotle and Greek mythology. We're in Cherokee, and I would even argue in some Hebrew deals, it wasn't so much that way. The perfection was looked at differently. And that gets into total depravity, and you have to go listen to that episode right now. But enough to say is that, well, from a Cherokee view, I would say that when they left that, the harmony was broken at the garden through the selfishness and desire of man that was tricked by the animals to be able to do something against it, which seems very similar to this ideal of the animals bringing disease upon the people. And it was they tried to cover themselves with medicine, but God steps in and gives them skins of robes, and it goes on, and they have it. And there's a little bit of differences in there that come through. But you see the harmony in views of that. Disharmony becomes upon the world at that time, and balance is broken in that spot. So when you have Jesus of Nazareth, who's coming on the table years later, and he's coming and he's beginning to say, hey, this is Creator God that has come in and indwelled and took on flesh of the creation, which is just this mind-blowing thing, that the one who made everything became like us, right? We have a high priest that's like us in every way, that he laid down everything him in Philippians 2, and he humbled himself to be made into human, just like us, right? To be able to be humbled upon even death on a cross. And in that, in his incarnation, in this sense that he came into the world through his life, his ministry, his death, his resurrection, his ascension, for the cross is all of that. We cannot separate the cross from the incarnation, because without the incarnation, the cross is worthless. And without the cross itself, with the death of Jesus, without the incarnation, it also breaks the balance of the harmony. You have to have the incarnation, the birth, the life, the ministry, the death, the resurrection, and the ascension. All of that events begin to say, guess what? Healing is now in the land. Because when you look at sozo, this word that we usually say is salvation, it actually, in the Greek sozo, it means to heal, to save, to heal, to put right. Now, that to me as a Cherokee, I'm like, that's Tohi, right? He came to heal or to put right that which was broken. He came to heal or put together that which was, stressed and unbalanced, and disharmony has been put into place. But now, all of a sudden, it's been redone and brought back, and we have healings in the blood of the wound of Christ Jesus to come back to heal us. Healing is in the plants, and the healing in the Johar and the Jolie and the incense that's been praised in the altars and the fires. There's healing in the cross, right? And then all that healing and balance has been brought back, can be brought back into harmony or into tohi and into balance. So in looking and saying, I am going to follow the way of Jesus of Nazareth, means I am going to follow in the right path. I'm going to follow in the path of harmony and balance, one of forgiveness, one of grace, one of mercy, one of being able to live in peace, the peacemakers that we've been called, right? Or Micah says, what is required of man but to live humbly and to seek justice and mercy and do mercy, right? Or seek justice, do justice and seek mercy, right? And even in James in the New Testament, it talks about like those who give mercy will receive mercy in our sense. In other words, those who seek to have harmony and balance will receive harmony and balance, depending in those words. So see, that's a different way of looking, and that is a way of life and salvation, of healing that comes in, that I think is just as important and just as biblical as, say, the Middle Eastern or the Middle European Middle Age kind of view of a just God and sitting on a courtroom. That was true for them in the 1500s in Europe. That mind made sense to them. And maybe to some of you out there, that legal mind makes sense. But I want to tell you from a Cherokee viewpoint, it never really set right to me. It does not seem right to me. God bless you again if that's in you. But for me to be able to say, you know what, the situation, humanity, the one I want to read of Adam and Eve, when I read through the Old Testament and I read about Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Moses and David, I see disharmony. I see imbalance because they were seeking to do things their way. They were seeking to, rule over the earth and to subjugate the earth or the animals. And they needed to live in balance and harmony with nature and themselves as they walked in. They needed to live in harmony with Unedohi, the creator. And that is what you read when you read the prophets and you read them talking about, hey, come back and seek, healings for the land. Go back to the prayers. Go back and take care and offer mercy and healing to the people. Stop going and adding riches and things to your life, and remember the poor. Don't go and chase those different gods of Baal and Asher stuff. And come back to the one, to the covenant, to the balance, to the way it is. That to me is an atonement of you that we come back to. I think there's roots in history within the Hebrew Bible, within the New Testament Bible, and it's one I think has legs to walk on per se, right? For those of us maybe in a different culture, in a different area. So that is where I would say, to me, Tohi, for balance and harmony. The cross is one that restores balance. The incarnation is one that brings back balance, or Tohi, and harmony to what we could walk in. Now, we also know that we live in the here and the not yet. We live in a time in which balance is here, but balance is not. Tohi can be seen, but Tohi is yet to come. Our salvation is here. We are saved. We are being saved. And when we one day will be saved, we were healed. We were balance restored through, again, the incarnation and the life and the ministry, the death, the resurrection, ascension of Jesus. There's this event that happened which actually broke the bonds of sin and death and unbalance and disharmony. And there's a sense that we have been restored in balance. And yet there's a sense that we are currently being made in his image, being reborn and rebirthed. We are being made purified, as a different way of saying, or in other words, we are learning to walk in balance every single day. And there will come a day eventually when all of the heavens and the earth will be restored and balance will be back. And this is when the Lamb will lay down with the lion, and where there's no more sin, no more sorrows, no more tears, no more illnesses happening, because then and only then we're back in balance, so where we can speak the language of our animals and the plants and the different places and nature, and all of balance is restored on that beautiful day when he comes. Hallelujah. I'm getting into preaching, man. My preaching's coming out a little bit on this one. But anyway, I keep going on that one. But you see, again, how balance and harmony can play out so much if we just start with maybe looking, and because again, I want to come back and say is we all start with a culture. We always start. Doesn't matter how much we say we want to start with the Bible. Guess what? We read through our lens of a 2025 American or a Hispanic or a Cherokee or a European or a German or a Russian or an African or a Korean or wherever we are. We start, and I believe that God's mysterious heart and joy is so much bigger, and he can connect us and move us and wind us together in ways that we just can only imagine. So hopefully you enjoyed it. I enjoy being able to share a little bit of that. Again, the atonement, the mosaic of atonement, so to speak, right, of the different ways. If you like this, make sure you like and subscribe. I'm on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. If you have questions, drop a comment in the links if you want, and be able to, if you have a topic you want to chat with or something like that, drop it in there. Share, subscribe. That way other people can find the Fractured Faith podcast. So until next time, we'll see you again, or Donna Daga Ai. Until next time, because we do not have a word for goodbye in the Cherokee language. Take care. God bless. Bye.